Stories. I'm Sam from Data Manchester, joined with Rachel from, I'm pointing over there because she's on that side of my screen, might not be to you. Rachel from Her+Data Manchester, and we've got John and Joe from Data Manchester. So do feel free to introduce yourself in the chat, in the Zoom chat, say hello, tell us a little bit about yourself, and we're going to get things kicking off in a couple of minutes. So you've got a couple of minutes to grab a cup of tea maybe, or something stronger if that's your poison. So yeah. Just so you know, this session is being recorded, and it's also being live streamed on YouTube via Data Manchester stream. So if maybe you don't want to, you're very welcome to have your camera on, very welcome to take part. If you don't feel comfortable being broadcast in that way, and then maybe just leave your camera off for this evening. Oh, hi Peter, good to see you. Good to see you've made it.
Yeah, I took some time out from the earlier appointment. So
great stuff. So awesome.
Hope you don't mind the intern just behind me there. He's been with the company a little over a year now, and we've got him pretty involved in everything except drinking tea. For some reason, he has a problem with that. He spills most of it.
Okay, yeah, I'm just going to give it another minute or two. So as I say, if anyone needs to grab a last minute drink or anything like that, feel free. We'll get started. I think at 35 past, just to make it nice round numbers in my mind anyway. So yeah, what I would say as well, and you might have seen these already, is we do have we're going to have some sort of a round of lightning talks at the very end. So if anyone feels inspired during the course, we've got about 4 speakers planned. So if anyone feels inspired throughout the evening to share their own stories, we'll have a couple of minutes at the end for you to do that. But if you don't feel comfortable, speaking in front of the group, you can submit your story anonymously, which I've just put a link to a Google form in the chat box. So do feel free to submit a short story via that, and we'll try to read them out throughout the session if we can. So great. I am going to share my screen. Great. So hopefully you can all see my screen. You should have the data horror stories on the top. So that's great. So yeah. So brilliant. I'm just gonna get things get the ball rolling, as it were. So welcome everyone for joining us this evening for another round of data horror stories. So I believe this is actually the 4th one that we've done now, which is really great to see it come back, and great to see so many of you join us. Maybe this is your first time to one of these sessions. Well, you're very welcome. I'm just going to get things kicking off very quickly. We'll do some introductions and then I'll pass over. But I'm just going to hand over to Rachel. Would you like to quickly just run through our plan for the evening?
Thanks, Sam. So tonight we're going to start off, like Sam said, with some introductions to the various hosting organizations. And then we're going to start with our first data horror story from Julian. Well, you'll have time to ask any questions afterwards. And then I'm going to share a quick news item that I found to be kind of entertaining. And then we'll have speakers Rish and Peter join us after 7 to share their data horror stories. And like Sam said, there will be time at the end if any of you feel inspired or confident enough to share your data horror stories, or if not, you can submit them anonymously via the form that is being shared in the chat, and then we can read those out on your behalf, and then we'll wrap up at 8.
Excellent. Thanks, Rachel. And I know Rish he said he'll be with us about 7 o'clock, but if he's not here in time, Peter, we might ask you to go third, if that's okay with you.
That's fine.
Great, thank you. So just before we go any further, I would just like to draw your attention to our community code of conduct. This is just to it's just to make sure that these are open spaces. Everybody is welcome here, regardless. We encourage people to ask questions. Please do. If you've got any questions to the speakers throughout, please add them in the chat box. But we also, just be mindful of each other and just be careful, to allow each other time to speak, not to interrupt, that sort of thing. And that's it really. So let's all just be nice to each other, because we're all nice people, and we've never had a problem, and I don't expect we'll have one tonight. But just very, very quickly, as you may know, tonight has been brought to you by three Greater Manchester based organizations. So we're just going to do some quick introductions. So as I've said at the start, my name's Sam. We're Open Data Manchester. So we're a community of people from civil society, public, private sectors, anyone who wants to use data responsibly and intelligently. And we work collaboratively with a wide range of communities in organizations here in Manchester, but we also work nationally and also internationally. So if you want to find out more about the work that we do, there's our website on there. It's opendatamanchester.org.uk. We also run declaration.org.uk, which is the Declaration for Responsible and Intelligent Practice, so data practice. So if you don't want to find out anything more about the work we do, we would absolutely love to hear from you. Just a couple of events that we have coming up. On this coming Thursday in the afternoon at 3 p.m, we are running an event called Countdown to COP, in which we're looking at sort of environmental action powered by data. So we've got things like people working with measuring peat levels, some really cool stuff going on in Ghana about how they let people warn people about water levels, that sort of thing. A project in South Manchester, which is using data to raise awareness of traffic levels, a community-led project. And we'll be finding out a bit more about what we can do to sort of help reduce our waste and plastic waste and so on. So that should be a nice little event. It's on in the afternoon. We would absolutely love to see you there. I'll share the links for that. And something else that we are running is, you might have seen recently, there was the government paper, the New Direction for Data, and we are helping we're working with the GMCA on the Monday, the 1st, 2nd and 3rd of November to help organizations, but also the public, respond to it. It's quite a dense consultation. It's quite a dense paper, and we're sort of helping.
I'll resend it to you on your
and there we go. Yeah. So, okay, great. So we also have a newsletter. Again, I'll put the links into the chat box. We send out a newsletter once a month. It has all of our sort of events and workshops and news from around the community as well. Rachel, over to you.
Great, thank you. So my name is Rachel. I am one of the organizers of Her+Data Manchester, which is a meetup group for women in data. So our mission is to bring together women with a connection to data, to provide a safe space where we can support, celebrate, and inspire each other, share experiences and knowledge, establish meaningful connections, and of course, talk data. So you can find out more about us on our meetup page or follow us on Twitter. And then we have started sharing our events from lockdown, some of the talks that we've had on our YouTube channel, so you can see more there, and I'll paste some more ways to connect with us in the chat. Next slide, please, Sam. So our next event, so I guess I should say our events are the second Thursday of each month, and our next one is on Thursday, the 11th of November, where Jessie Stewart will be talking to us about shocking substitutions, applications of affinity analytics to avoid supermarket swap fails. So I'll paste more information about that in the chat as well. Next slide, please, Sam. And then finally, I would just like to briefly mention, I work at the Software Sustainability Institute, and I'm based at the University of Manchester, and I just wanted to highlight a few kind of upcoming opportunities. So the Institute has a fellowship program which provides £3,000 for individuals who want to improve how research software is used in their domains and or areas of work. So the deadline for this is rapidly approaching. It's this weekend. If you would like to learn more, the link is there, and I'll paste it in the chat in a minute. And then we also are running a research software camp the first 2 weeks of November called Beyond the Spreadsheet. So this will be kind of relevant to the story that I'm going to talk about when it's my turn. But basically it's from how spreadsheets are used in research and how to kind of move beyond them. And that's me. Thanks, Sam.
Great. And then John from HER+Data is just going to come in and say a quick word about HER+Data Manchester as well.
Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in, as it were. And thanks for Sam and Rachel for helping organise. So I'm John from HER+Data Manchester. HER+Data is a global organisation to help foster, I guess, open source software around data. Now it started off around Python, but we do an awful lot more than that. Python, JavaScript, Java, it doesn't matter. It's all about making data and tools open and available to everyone. And that goes from data science, machine learning, data analytics, data visualization, anything you can do with data. We're here to help learn about it and help share. We have a couple of different events that we usually do. Coming up, I think next month, we're looking at doing a code night. So one of the things we try and do on a regular basis is create new events so people can come in and ask questions and help to learn about whatever it is they're trying to learn or struggle with. So usually there's someone in the event who can help you out. So when we're in a nice physical space, you'd sit down, introduce yourself to the person next to you and ask a question and try and find some help. And we've been taking that online. So I think that's what we're going to be doing for the November event. But yeah, you can find us at our Twitter, at our meetup, and if you tweet any of the co-hosts, so myself, Joe, Jennifer, and Sean, we're always happy to try and help people in any way we can. And we've also got a Slack, which you can find in our Twitter page, where there's a lovely community of people from across the country and some even across the globe who all try and help each other out. That's from me.
Great stuff. Thanks, John. So so as I've said, tonight we're going to get started in a second with our first speaker. We've got Julian first, then we'll have Rachel, and then if Rish is here, I don't know if Rish has arrived yet. He said, "Oh, there, Rish. Hello. Sorry, I just saw you there. Hi, welcome, Rish."
Hey, thanks.
Great stuff. So we've got a full lineup tonight. That's great stuff. So yeah, we'll have Rish third, and then we'll have Peter fourth. But we do have a chance at the end for you to share your stories. So if you feel brave enough to sort of have a minute or two at the end to share a data horror story, let us know by sending either me or Rachel a message in the chat, or you can submit your story anonymously via the Google form that's being shared in the chat as well. Great. So I am going to stop sharing my screen, and I'm going to hand over to our first speaker of the night, a very well, by the looks of it, a very well behatted Julian Tate. Over to you.
Thanks, Sam. Hello, everybody. Hopefully I'm not going to be that scary, but you never know. Right. I want to tell you a story about, well, I suppose I've called it somewhere between a mouse and a unicorn, and it's basically about missing transportation data. And actually, it's not so much a horror story, unless you can call horror stories ones that kind of drive you into the ground through their boredom and process. And it's a battle to try and get something that's just basic out of an organization. So trams, don't we just love them? They're big and yellow and they get us from A to B. But back in the dim and distant past, pre-COVID times, the times when you had to buy a ticket and know what the price was, or have the correct money, you never knew quite how much it cost to get from A to B. You would go to the tram stop and then you would kind of put your money in the ticket machine or use your card. And each journey was priced individually. A crazy system. Obviously now, if you get a tram, it's all a zonal system, a bit like London, but before then, it wasn't the case. And that information and that data wasn't readily available. So Open Data Manchester, as you probably know, we like a good transportation challenge. We've tried to dig into bus timetables, trying to manage some really, I wouldn't say complex data, but just really poor quality data, trying to make sense out of the whole thing. It's the kind of thing that chills your blood and makes you want to die. It's that kind of horror story. And so how do you get information out of the transit organization that is TFGM? Well, back in 2017 and prior, and we'd also been involved with this, you'd use freedom of information requests. So this is a very onerous process, and it's something we shouldn't really have to be doing to get information that will be of public benefit out of an organization that is trying to provide a public service. So ourselves, as well as many other people, quite a few people in Leeds as well, just wanted to get the information, the data out of Transport for Greater Manchester. But lo, they wouldn't release it because, as you can see within this slide, there were many reasons, but the main one was it was all about commercial interest. They thought that A, there were competitors on the tram system. There was obviously some phantom trams that were running around who were trying to kind of capture people when we weren't looking. So they didn't want to have any competitors getting their hands on this very valuable transportation information. And also they didn't really understand that anybody who had a business interest in doing this, perhaps had a few trams hidden away in their shed, they could just go around and just keep pressing the buttons on the ticket machines and they'd be able to extract that data just like that. But lo, it wasn't going to be easy. So we decided to tackle what was then Metrolink's fares database. And we did this in two ways. So what you could do, you could go to the website and just manually enter your stop and where you wanted to get to one by one, and you could extract the data in this manner and put it in a table. Jamie White, who's a fellow colleague, who's director of Open Data Manchester, did it a little bit more programmatically. He discovered that actually the URLs for the were you could create some procedural code that used a Python scraper and could go through the whole database and extract all this information and put it in some nicely readable formats or machine readable formats. So over a weekend, I did the manual way. He did some code and we extracted the whole database. And what we did, we made this available. We thought, what we'll do, we'll put it on in our Dropbox and just allow everybody to have it, thinking that would be the job's done, and that would help people create things from it. And it did for a time until we got warned. What we thought was data that we captured ourselves actually fell under a database right. And actually it wasn't necessarily that the data within the database, it was the structure of the database. So naturally on advice, we took this hard extracted data down. What could we do? How could we help the people of Greater Manchester when this notorious fiend was sought to undermine us and scare us away from revealing this information? Well, the only thing that we could do was try and create an easy guide. So we created a table which has all the Metrolink data on it, but we couldn't recreate the same database. So what we ended up doing was creating an emoji base of all the tram fares within Greater Manchester, encoded within the dogs, cats, horses, unicorns, and hamsters was the entire fare structure. A totally useless exercise, a total waste of time, but it was a principle of the thing. And so somewhere between a mouse, if you were getting around Piccadilly, and a unicorn, as if you were going as far as Rochdale, you could get from A to B. And that's my horror story.
Brilliant, brilliant. Thank you so much, Julian. So yeah, no, really fascinating. I'm just wondering if anybody has any questions for for Julian at this time, and anything they'd like to ask him about his story or what they did, what happened. Feel free to either pop them in the chat box, or if you feel brave enough, just go ahead and unmute yourself and ask away.
Why that approach? I mean, it is clearly a very different schema. Is that as far as it got?
It was just we got bored. We got bored. I mean, in a way, TFGM kind of won, but actually what happened a few months into 2018, they adopted a zonal approach, and we don't have to worry about this anymore. So as an exercise, it was just, you know, it was an exercise in ridiculousness, and we actually kind of promoted it as such as well. And it was just kind of, it was to try and make their position a little bit silly.
Got a bit bored. Love it. Any other comments or questions for Julian? No. That's all good. So yeah, but if anyone does have any follow-up questions for Julian, please do feel free to pop them in the chat, and I'm sure he'll be happy to respond to you. I'm going to hand over to Rachel, because we've been scouring some of the recent news articles for Data Horror Stories, and I think Rachel's got one to share with us now quickly.
Thanks for that generous introduction. I did not source any of these, but they're all really funny. And so the one we're going to briefly share now is one called Microsoft Tay. So I guess Microsoft was trying to, maybe I'll just share my screen here so that people can read it while I'm speaking. Yeah, so I guess Microsoft was trying to do some testing to understand more natural language processing. And the way to do this was to develop a Twitter bot, as most of us did, several years ago to test our skills. So in 2016, they released Tay to Twitter. So this research team described Tay, which is short for thinking about you, as the AI with zero chill, because the bot, I guess, started to make really terrible and derogatory remarks in response to other users on Twitter. And this was done, let's see, so it was initially released to test and improve Microsoft's understanding of natural language and conversation. It used its AI skills to learn from interactions to have better conversations in the future. But because Twitter can be a dangerous and terrible and toxic place, Twitter users began to target the vulnerabilities of the AI bot, and it therefore learned some highly inappropriate and disgusting behavior. So it got turned off in less than 24 hours after being launched, with the CEO commenting that Tay had a great influence on how Microsoft is approaching AI and the importance of accountability.
Brilliant, thanks. Thanks, Rachel. Yeah, and what I'll do is, we've had a couple of the anonymous stories submitted, so I might just read one out really quickly before we move on to our next speaker. So this one, I'm just going to read this one out quickly. I don't know who this is from. This is it says, I'm going to read this one out as is, actually, because it paints quite a nice picture. One dark and stormy night in Manchester, I was exploring tweets about veganism across different cities. This involves building up a single large search query of search terms and location. The location is defined as point_radius, that's long lat radius. This seems simple enough. I used an online tool and typed in London, returning 510, the latitude and longitude of London. I hastily searched point radius 5105 miles, not realizing the gravity of my mistake. It returned one tweet from the Shard building in London. So I was in the right place, but surely there was more than one tweet relating to veganism at that time, definitely in London, I would have thought. After days of distress, it was pointed out to me on GitHub that I had swapped my latitudes and longitudes around. I'd hit my rate limit searching for vegan tweets 1,000 miles off the coast of Somalia. But this left one terrifying question. If it was off the coast of Somalia, why was there a tweet from the Shard? So yeah, brilliant. Love it. So that's one of our anonymous stories. If you want to admit your submit your own, or maybe admit your own, maybe that's a more suitable term. I've just popped the link back in the chat there, so do feel free. So I'm going to hand over to our next scheduled speaker, who is actually, I'm going to pass back over to Rachel, who's got a data horror story to share with us.
Thanks, Sam. So I'm not quite as good a storyteller as Julian is, but I do have something that I think is quite entertaining related to research software to share. So this isn't a new story. This came out, I think, towards the end of last year. Yeah, it says August 6th right there, 2020. But basically, the headline is "Scientists rename human genes to stop Microsoft Excel from misreading them as dates." And this is kind of something a lot of us can relate to in, Excel or spreadsheets, reformatting random things as dates. But this can have quite serious consequences for research. So I'll share the link to this article in the chat once I'm done. But basically what the article talks about is, there are tens of thousands of genes in the human genome, and each gene is given a name and an alphanumeric code, which is, I guess, known as a symbol, which scientists use to coordinate their research. But last year, around 30 of the human genes had to be renamed, all because Microsoft Excel kept misreading their symbols as dates. So Excel is clearly a prominent tool in the spreadsheet world and is regularly used by scientists to track their work and even conduct clinical trials. But its default settings were designed with probably much more mundane applications in mind. So when a user inputs a gene's alphanumeric symbol into a spreadsheet, for example, March1, which is short for membrane associated ring CH type finger 1, Excel would convert it into a date, the 1st of March. So because of this, scientists have had to sort through data manually in order to restore the data to its actual gene symbols. And this can be problematic in a number of ways, and it can cause errors to be widespread, even within peer-reviewed work. Excel doesn't offer the option to turn off this auto-formatting, and so the only way to avoid it is to change the data type for individual columns. But even then, things can happen, such as a scientist might fix their data, but export it as a comma-separated variable file or a CSV file without saving the formatting. Or another scientist might load the data without the correct formatting, which can change the gene symbols back into dates. So the end result is that while knowledgeable Excel users can avoid this problem, it's very easy for mistakes to be introduced. One study from 2016 examined the genetic data shared alongside 3.5 thousand papers published and found that roughly 1/5 had been affected by these Excel errors. So that's a really high percentage of errors in the academic literature on this topic. And my favorite quote from the article is by Desomodos, where he says, "It's really, really annoying." He says Excel errors happen all the time simply because the software is often the first thing to hand when scientists process numerical data. And especially, when students are just getting started, or if you have scientists who are less computationally literate, Excel or spreadsheets are usually the first thing we go to. So it can cause a lot of frustration. So that's where the Hugo Gene Nomenclature Committee, or HGNC, comes in. They are the scientific body in charge of standardizing the names of genes. So last year they published new guidelines for gene naming, with specifically how to include or how to avoid Excel's auto-formatting. And as a result of this, around 30 genes have been renamed. So for example, March1 has now been renamed to March F1, and Sept1 has been renamed to Septin1, and so on for about 30 of them. So the HGNC, in consultation with the genomics community, Also focused the guidelines to minimize confusion, as apparently in the past, gene naming was, quote, often a playground for creative scientists in the early days, unquote. So now the committee says that the gene symbols should be unique and gene names should be brief and specific. They cannot use subscript or superscript. They can only contain Latin letters and Arabic numbers, or numerals, and they should not spell out names or words. And they highlighted particularly offensive ones, a rule that should hold true ideally in any language, because I guess apparently there were some that were named, you know, hedgehog after Sonic, apparently a Pokemon, but there were also some that could allude to perhaps mental health issues and other inappropriate names that can be or cause problems, especially when in discussions with patients. So they said that renaming genes is not unusual, as many gene symbols that can be read as nouns have been previously renamed to avoid false positives during searches. So some examples that they gave was Cars, which has been renamed to Cars 1, Wars, which has been named to Wars 1, and Mars was renamed as Mars 1. And other changes have been made to avoid insult, which they had to clarify. But what's interesting about this particular case last year is that this is the first time that the guidelines have been rewritten specifically to counter the problems caused by software. And it had a very positive reaction from the genomics community, with, I guess, a lot of people tweeting their absolute joy at this change because the frustrations were shared across the community. So kind of the final question within the article was, why was it easier to rename human genes than it was to change how Excel works? It was kind of this battle of genomics versus Microsoft. But the coordinator of the HGNC, or the committee for renaming the genes, said that this was quite a limited use case of the Excel software. So there's very little incentive for Microsoft to make a significant change to features that are used extremely widely by the rest of the massive community of Excel users. And yeah, that's the end of that story. But it just goes to show how, you know, an entire scientific field can change how it inputs data in order to combat frustrations and errors in Microsoft Excel.
That's crazy. Yeah, I really like that. Thank you, Rachel, for sharing that. And yeah, and actually there's a good question in there from Rish in the chat box, which I was going to ask too. He asked, was, you know, not using an Excel an option? Does it talk about that?
I mean, it doesn't talk about it in the article, but these days there is a big push towards teaching more reproducible and automated research through the use of programming language such as R and Python to avoid a lot of this. But what the article did highlight is, you know, especially when you're first getting started out in research, you don't have those skills yet. Excel is usually the first thing that you go to. And perhaps more senior researchers who have been using this software for a long time are hesitant to learn new ways of working. So yeah, it's difficult to shift tradition.
Yeah, I mean, I don't understand sometimes why sheets seem formatted in a certain way, and then you open up and start a new one and it'll be in a different way, you know, be set to time or be set to date, and there doesn't seem any logic behind it. Maybe it's just Microsoft getting in there first, isn't it? Brilliant. Is there any other questions for Rachel? Yeah, there's a question from Tanner Joseph here. There seems to be a shift from Excel to Google Spreadsheets. Does that program have the same issue? It's a good question.
I don't actually know if it does or not. I haven't really tested it, but hope not.
If anybody knows the answer to that, please do let us know in the chat box. So yeah, great. If anyone has any other questions for Rachel, feel free to ask them now, or you can put them in the chat box, and I'm sure she'll be able to respond. So yeah, so thank you, Rachel, for that. That was great. I really enjoyed that. So So great. What I might do now, just before I hand, because we've got Rish up next, but I might just spend a couple of minutes, and I've got an anonymous submission I'd like to read. So so maybe I'll read that now. So let me just get it up. So this is quite an interesting one. I might do a slightly edited down version because it's quite a long one. But what I might do is, if people are interested, I could potentially post it in the chat box. So this is about the Greater Manchester Police, actually, a data horror story. So as you'll know, I think back in 2019 there was a new computer system implemented. Oh, it's just disappeared from my screen. The Integrated Operational Policing System, known as IOPS. And from very early on, there was kind of concern that it wasn't working correctly, or that it was basically not fit for purpose. People found it difficult to use. Ability to search the system and to enter information was troublesome for users. But it also, the system would just stop working. And it meant that many police officers had to resort to taking statements and other vital information on old school and pen and paper, which meant that a lot of officers were not able to submit crimes and certain things, sort of domestic reports and other vital information. So what that meant, that there was an enormous kind of backlog, and you might have read about this quite a bit it's been in the news and so on. So quite a lot. So the issue, I think, sort of persisted and kind of I think by the looks of the problem just kind of got a little bit worse. But they have been trying to do something about it. And I think that there's been a lot of technical fixes that have solved some of the problems, but potentially not all of them. And I don't want to go into too much in the detail because it's quite potentially, there's a lot of stuff that's already out there in the public domain. But from what I hear, they are actually going to be doing something about it, which is really, really good. That apparently there's going to be an public accountability meeting will be held in Oldham on Friday the 26th of November, and the event is going to be live streamed so that all Greater Manchester residents can view it. And I think that's a really, really positive thing for us to be able. So we should. Unfortunately, the story doesn't have any further details about that, but I'm sure that if people are interested, and if you've been following that story, we'll be able to find it probably hopefully on GMP's website or Twitter page and so on, but maybe we'll keep an eye out for that as well. So if anyone does know any more information about that, but just thank you for sharing that story. And if people want to know more, there's a lot more detail in there. And this is just a nice little simple one I thought I would just share really, really quickly about home office data in ODS format. In theory, nice and open, but with some filters turned on by default. And so this person spent weeks trying to recover missing data before someone showed them how to turn the filter off. So yes, so there we go. Great stuff. So brilliant. So thank you, Rachel, and thank you, Julia. Now I'm going to hand over to Rish Gupta. So Rish, thank you for joining us this evening. And
thanks,
hopefully you can share your screen okay. Did I?
Yeah, I should be able to do that.
So over to you, Rish.
Thank you. Hold on, let me just check. Are you guys able to see my screen?
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. I definitely think I went a little bit over the top with my slides, but I thought going with the theme, why not? Well, I call my story Betrayal of the API. So first, a bit about myself. Let me put this here so you can see what's going on. I'm Rish Gupta. Currently, I'm working as head of commercial at Radius Payment Solutions in Crew. I'd be ideal mainly with data analytics and data mining within our company. A bit background about myself. I grew up in Kuwait, studied computer engineering in India. Then I went on to work as a big data consultant at Dell. That was for about 2-3 years. Then I started a startup in the nightlife industry, and that's where my data horror story comes in. After that, traveled to Barcelona, did an MBA, and now I'm here in Crew, living in Manchester, but working in Crew. And why am I doing this? Because so that you can all learn from mistakes. I'm very much the victim and the perpetrator of my story. So you can definitely see both sides of this. So, right, onwards to the story. So my startup was a social networking nightlife platform, which basically gave people live information about pubs and clubs, what's happening day to day, not your concerts, because we all have all big websites for that. I wanted to help myself, really. That's what I was doing. So why did we do this? Because there was lack of good information. Everybody either wanted to make restaurant table booking websites or, just distribute this data through Facebook groups or SMS blasts back then. This was in 2016. So this was in Bangalore, which is considered the Silicon Valley of India. So I thought everyone would be tech friendly and adopt the product. And a lot of keen students and tourists who want to know where to get a drink. So left my career at Dell, went full in, and the first year of working on the startup, built a website, which itself was probably a horror story because I had two developers who ran away mid-development, gave up on the project, and said, we can't do this anymore. I mean, we were not really stressing them out really, but they just gave up on it. And side by side, my business partner was working on how to procure this data. Now, as you might imagine, we need live information data, but it didn't exist anywhere. So we had to make those personal one-to-one connections with all pub managers and club managers who weren't very tech savvy, who barely had smartphones and dealt with their events day to day. Maximum, they would plan a week ahead. So you get a phone call from people saying, this is what we're planning. So you have to that's obviously not a very sustainable way to, run a business. So we started to transition them to Excel from phone calls. And that was an upgrade. So you can imagine how bad the situation was. And well, that also wasn't going great. So because they wouldn't pick up our calls, they weren't very professional anyways, so made a tool for them, so make life easy for them, using WordPress, and they still didn't care because they wouldn't fill it because we were nobody. Eventually, after a year, we tried and failed many ways. We decided to pivot because we realized they're not a reliable source of information, and we need to find a way to get this data so that at least, I think if we got big enough and we got a good user base, they would provide us data. But the problem with platforms, and that's what I learned by MBA, that never launch a platform, is that you need to get buy-in from either of the sides to really make this work. So, well, I discovered the Facebook Open Graph API, which had a lot of this event information in Bangalore free. So it was open data, which you could probably just query. Anyone can do that. I think even now some events are free, so you can probably still use this to an extent. Of course. So back then in 2017, I discovered that this exists, and this actually has a surprising amount of data out in the open, which means events, who's playing, the artist, event posters even. So quite a lot of data is out there in the open. Thought, surely we can't make money out of this, but definitely we can, use this as a proof of concept, launch it, go live, and then switch to our own tool and run that as a company. So we did that. We went ahead and built an app, used this Open Graph API, and decided that in our first 1 year, let it be free for all, free for businesses, pubs and clubs, free for all customers, and then prove our concept, get a buy-in. That was going great. So at this time, just to check of status, 2.5 years since I've been in this full time, probably all my savings were gone then. And so were my partners, 1,500 monthly signups. So that was going great. We actually got a lot of partner events launched too, because people saw the potential and they were even giving us free events, to have app signups, all those things. So everything looked great. And this was really 9 months, I think, around into our app journey. And this was around 2018. So those of you who have good memory may remember what happened in 2018. Boom, that's your Cambridge Analytica and Facebook scandal. Yeah, so this is what happened in 2018. I think it was around April, when overnight Facebook decided, because of all the heat that it was getting, I think that's when Zuckerberg gave a hearing in the Senate as well. Overnight, they turned off the API and all our apps went blank. We had no redundancy, no contingency plan, because as you see, we exhausted all our options because they weren't filling us data for them, through Excel, through our tool, picking up our phone calls. So overnight, 2.5 years into this journey, it was all gone. We actually thought of different options where we could have, a different pivot and, persevere. But my business partner decided, I think this was the end of it, and we can probably pick it up later. But yeah, we decided to shut down our startup and go onwards to do different things. Obviously, the many lessons learned from this in many ways. Could have planned better, could have had a different strategy, not depending on Facebook, but just probably lessons learned from my end, just on data perspective, just to question what you rely on for your work, for your businesses, plan for worst case scenarios, and obviously sound a bit nihilist, but then nothing is permanent. Anything can go away at any time. And of course, fuck Facebook. That's it. Thank you. That's it.
Yeah, thank you so much, Rish. Really enjoyed that, and also I really enjoyed the slides as well. So I don't think you went over. I think the slides were just perfect. So you said they just turned their. If anyone has any questions for Rish, please do pop them in the chat. I have a couple of questions myself, really. When you said that Facebook just turned the API off, they just went blank overnight. There was no warning from them. There was no communication with them. They just went blank, and that was it. There was no.
On the day they did it, they sent an email blast to all the developers who were using the Facebook Graph Open API, saying that because of the scandal and everything that's going on with Cambridge Analytica, they've taken a preventive measure to immediately restrict access because, and this is what I didn't include the slides, but I thought I was running over. Apparently, Cambridge Analytica used a very similar API. They use a Graph Open API, but they use the same loophole. And we didn't realize we were using a loophole. We just were using open data. So they thought that was the first point of attack to really, take control of the situation.
Yeah. Wow. And actually, I suppose, where are you guys now? Has anything come up next, or are you?
Well, this was in 2018 when I shut down the startup, and to be honest, it was a bit exhausting going through all the issues. And by the end of it, I realized, well, my target segment doesn't really care. They'll still find a place to get a drink, and all this effort for probably a good to have, but it's not really a big need. And I lost the purpose from my end to really work on that app for that segment. I would say I could have pursued, but just thought that's a good time to reevaluate.
Well, just having a quick look in the chat box, I know Alice has put in interesting. She says Facebook's event data is no longer open, and that they're working on. They put a link, the GitHub for Geeks for Social Change, to try and scrape it because it's so locked down. So if anyone is interested, Alice, thank you for sharing that link. And then another link as well, trying to get Facebook event data. There's a place, cal.org. So Alice, thank you for sharing those links as well. Just seeing if there are any more. There's some good comments in there. Rish, have a look. If anyone's got any other questions for Rish, please do feel free to ask them. What I might do is just quickly now before we hand over to well firstly actually to Rish, I'll just say thank you for that talk. Thank you for that. It was brilliant. I really enjoyed that. So thank you.
Thank you so much for having me.
Great stuff. So if anyone has any other questions for Rish or any of our speakers so far, do feel free to get in touch in the chat box. And also if there's any other way people can get in touch with you, Rish, please put your contact. If you feel free sharing like your Twitter or whatever it is, do that. So Rachel, I'm going to hand over to you quickly just to share another one of our news articles we looked at, and then I'll do another quick anonymous submission. So
brilliant. Yeah, I really enjoyed this one. Motorists fined after CCTV confuses his number plate with women's t-shirt. So they got their fine in the mail for driving in a bus lane in Bath, which is 120 miles away from his home, apparently. But what ended up happening is there was just a woman walking in the bus lane with the word knitter on her t-shirt which the computer had mixed up with his registration plate, which said KN19TER, which is, I guess, a nickname for him, Niter. So I think that's a really hilarious and unfortunate mistake.
I do absolutely love that one, and that's really, really funny. So yeah, great. And I'm just, what I'll do is quickly before we hand over to our final speaker is I will read another submission that's just come through. So thank you everyone for submitting these, and it's not too late. Do feel free to continue to submit them. And again, you know, if you would like a few minutes at the end of the session to share a story yourself, you're very, very welcome to. So this is a very quick one. It was a random night in March 2021 when my healthy 27-year-old sister received a text to book her COVID-19 vaccine. She had no idea why, but they took it anyway. 6 months later, she comes to find out the reason for this was because the GP had her weight and height switched, and she was jotted down at 57 centimeters and 483 BMI. So there we go. I suppose.
I can actually comment on that. I've had my weight recorded double as to what it was, and I got invited to get my vaccine quite early because of it.
That's hilarious. I mean, you could argue it's not so, you know, it's a horror story, but one from which the person potentially benefits from. I don't know. Yeah, one way of looking at it. So yes, brilliant. So okay, well everyone, I'm going to hand over to our final speaker for the evening. I'm going to hand over to Peter, and yeah, take it away with your data horror story.
Hi folks, I'm just going to share some slides, and that's just going to take a tick as I share a portion of a screen, because that's probably just the wrong shape for everybody. Let me rearrange things very slightly so that I've got me and some of you and a few other people as well. Right. Sorry for the motion sickness inducing movement there. Can you see that without too much other stuff on the edge? Marvelous.
Yes.
There's no way that I could compete with Rish's slides, so I'm afraid I've just gone for dark mode. Hopefully it'll work. So what happens when data that you think is open suddenly becomes special category healthcare data when you didn't actually do anything to change it? Oh dear. So I'm talking about omic data. It's biodata. I'll come on to that. And then I'll go through a history of what's happened. And I'll be taking an audience vote on what you think should have happened at the end of this before I reveal what has happened. Omic data, there's lots of omics. There's genomics, which most people are aware of, so DNA in the genome. But DNA isn't particularly useful in itself. It's only useful in that you transcribe it into proteins which do fancy things. So you have the notion of transcriptomics, which is the study of how you turn DNA into proteins. And then there's proteogenomics, which is the actual mapping process between the DNA and the proteins. And there's other things. There's lipidomics, the study of basically fats. There's metabolomics, what goes into and comes out of cells. The one I'm interested in is proteomics. So this is about proteins and how they do all of those weird things in cells and in the body, because they're really the engines that drive cells. Proteomics is a relatively young field. The area that I've been involved in, and I should add tonight, particularly given that this is being recorded, that I am speaking in a personal capacity here. The reasons for that comment may become obvious later on. I am not speaking as part of any organisation I may have been part of or involved with. So 10 years ago, this was being dealt with by mass spectrometry, proteomic mass spectrometry. Proteins are basically very long sequences of amino acids. They're too long to do very much with. In the extreme case, you can more or less put a spatula in and pull a protein out, except that it wraps up on you. So if you're going to do anything sensible with proteins, what you tend to do is split them into shorter sequences called peptides. They then wrap up into little small blobs with different charges on the outside. You can then split those, essentially time-wise, by how much they like or dislike water. So you put them through a liquid chromatograph, exactly the same way that you may have seen people scribbling with a felt tip and drawing water up through that and all the colors coming out. In this case, it's all the different peptides coming out. Then as that lot comes out of the other end, fire those into a mass spectrometer, which is like a spectrometer that splits white light into rainbows, except that this is splitting this stream of incoming peptides by mass as to how much they weigh. For bonus points, if you really want some fun, you then bomb them with something like some nitrogen ions, split those into fragments and measure the masses of what you see. So you get this huge, and I mean huge, three-dimensional jigsaw puzzle. How much of this mass do I have at this time through the run? Great. Now we've got to put Humpty Dumpty back together again. So you've got the notion of spectral libraries, which are, hang on a minute, I've seen this thing at this time before, and this thing at this time before, and this thing at this time before, and it maps to this peptide, which maps back to this protein. What you get is basically a very, very lumpy jigsaw like a landscape. And 10 years ago, we knew well under what a third of that signal actually represented. 2/3 of what came out of the data from a mass spec was completely uninterpreted, hadn't a clue. We've got lots of complex processing required, and it's very expensive and time-consuming process. So first off, you have your expensive postdoc slaving over a hot mass spectrometer, and then for bonus points, they're slaving over a hot laptop to try and process this data for many CPU hours per sample. So if you think back to genomics in about the late 80s, it's mid-90s, it's like genomics 15 years earlier is pretty much the state of this stuff. So what do? Same as the genomics community. You get these dirty great raw files off the instruments, compressed, they're about 2 gigabytes, uncompressed, I've seen 80. And in a good open data way, you get these big open access, nice repositories to hold this data. They're still out there, Proteo Exchange, Pride, lots of people's academic careers basically depend on these things continuing to exist. And you encourage deposit of as much as possible, including the raw data files from humans, blood, tissue samples. Some people may start to see the problems here. So that was 10 years ago. 7 years ago, we were big into biomarker discovery. So can we use proteins in some way to detect disease? Can we use them to detect preferred treatment options? So which is the best antidepressant to prescribe for this person? How about cancers? Because it turns out we used the wrong classification for cancers. We should have classified it by the type of cancer rather than where it is. Because there's about 15 types of cancer that can occur in the breast. And several of those can occur in other parts of the body as well. So calling it breast cancer is the wrong thing to do. Okay, what you want to do, get a sample, find an appropriate biomarker, and decide whether that one is going to respond to, for example, reducing estrogen, for example, Herceptin. Okay, so get the right treatment, potentially save money. For bonus points, you save lives. Also, can you actually monitor response to treatment as well? That's a very interesting one that's not been explored enough, really. The short answer, yes. Sorry, we have 3 cats to feed in the background. You can probably hear the details of that. Can we use the new generation of instruments that were coming out? We're about 5 times more sensitive to do this faster and better. Also, yes. So lots of money got poured in, lots of labs established around the world. And because humans are the people or are the things in this world that pay most for having stuff cured, lots and lots of human samples get prioritized going through all of this. You can sort of see the falling rock gathering more speed at this point. 5 years ago, the academics were competing with each other. Big data is good, right? And besides, the bigger numbers you can quote in academic papers, the more kudos you can get and the more likely you are to be published in Nature. So you get things like the pan-human peptide library, 10,000 peptides and their associated proteins. We went through it. Some of those are actually decoys. Anyway, better quality searching, more CPU cycles, marvelous, okay? Finally, we're able to look at some of these peaks and get a better idea of what they are. But of course, this is eating more CPU cores. So you're starting to use high throughput computing, more samples, better processing, bigger libraries. The problem is we didn't actually get any more biomarkers out because we'd already got the low-hanging fruit. Hey-ho. So you ended up sort of picking out the slightly more distant stuff. There's still plenty to go at. Just as an aside on that rock that's rolling downhill, about 5 years ago, there was a paper published on the privacy risks of sharing clinical proteomics data. But nobody took much notice, particularly in the academic community, because, hey, it wasn't identifiable data, was it? 4 years ago, various advances in proteogenomics. Remember what I was saying about the mapping between DNA and proteins? Suddenly, we've got the ability, along with that and machine spectral library generation, to look at a chunk of DNA. And remember that you get variations at different points for this stuff, so you get variants. Turn both of those variants into proteins, work out what the peptides would be if you split them down, and work out what the masses of those peptides would be and how would they fragment, and also when would they be likely to come through the LCs, the liquid chromatograms. Right, so it's now possible to look for DNA variants in this protein data. And the response from the community, excellent. That's more signal detectable in that 2/3 of the signal that we've got no idea what it means. Okay, we can look for more things. Brilliant. And then it all went wrong. So we can look for DNA variants. We can look for proteins from diseases. We can probably look for proteins from viruses like HIV. Though I don't think anybody's ever done HIV particularly, because, you know, it's actually far easier just to do a antibody test for that. And we can do this in the old files that people have recorded and put in the open data repositories from before we could do this stuff. Oh shit. Suddenly, all of these data files that people have been putting in repositories for the last 10, 15 years, and copying and publishing, and there's copies in student tutorials all over the world, are as inherently as identifiable as fingerprint data or genomic data. They are inherently identifiable data. You can't change your proteome in the same way that you can't change your fingerprints or your genome. And for bonus points, they tell you about somebody's health. So not only are they sensitive personally identifiable data, they're special category because they can tell you things like HIV status. Right, quick audience survey. What would you expect to have happened as a result of that over the last 3 years? Feel free to unmute and comment if you wish for a couple of minutes. Don't all rush at once.
I'm quite the pessimist, so I think no one's taken any action at all.
I can tell you that action has been taken.
Okay, that's something.
I was going to say something.
Did people just find out that the years worth of data and like all these person hours have been taken away from him because they got like a cease and desist and said, don't do this anymore and give us all your data?
Okay. And to an extent, that would be a useful thing to have happened, you know, in terms of the portcullises slamming down. Any other suggestions? Okay. So academics were learning from the genomic data and the fact that, you know, once the first few genomes had been sequenced and it was so bleeding obvious that this stuff was inherently identifiable, the proteomics community decided that they absolutely did not want that. So I attended a meeting in Amsterdam in April 2019 around this issue and presented there basically saying, guys, the portcullis is going to have to come down. It took 22 months to publish a very, very carefully worded paper titled Data Management of Sensitive Human Proteomics Data, Current Practices, Recommendations and Perspectives for the Future. And I'll just quote this from the abstract. Yet a careful balance must be kept. On the one hand, neglecting to address the potential of identifiability in human proteomics data could lead to reputational damage of the field. Nothing about, you know, people's data being exposed or anything there, you note. Reputational damage of the field. While on the other hand, erecting barriers to open access to clinical proteomics data will inevitably reduce reuse of proteomics data and could substantially delay critical discoveries in biomedical research. The whole paper is essentially an apology for doing the level best to keep the whole thing open. And two of the key authors are the people whose careers depend on proteome exchange and pride. Really? What a surprise. Meanwhile, at least hundreds of terabytes of this special category, personal data, for at least tens of thousands of subjects might well be out there, either freely copied or, in the case of at least one university I know, completely inadequately defended under that university's own data protection rules. Sufficiently scary for people? There endeth my talk.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Peter, so much for sharing that. That is quite a horror story. I'm just wondering if there's, is there any? I mean, is there anything happening in regards to this? Any next steps? Any movement from this at all that you know of, or is that kind of the last you've heard about it?
One shoe has dropped. A lot of people are waiting for the other shoe to drop, but they don't know what it is. So, for example, a contact of mine actually worked for the Information Commissioner's Office a few years back, because I looked at this and I looked at it when a particular project started, and I thought, one of two things is going to happen here. Either the machines are not sensitive enough and the whole biomarkers idea is going to fail horribly, or if the machines are sensitive enough, this is identifiable data. So we actually got an opinion from Liz Denham. And Liz's view was, we haven't got a clue. We're only the regulator. We can't put any effort into it. We have one person dealing with the whole of healthcare. Okay, that is how much effort ICO has available to it. Please conduct a data protection impact assessment and then tell us the result, because we have no other way of doing it.
Yeah, as you can see from in the chat box, proper proper horror story, this one. But I really appreciate you coming and sharing it with us. Does anybody else have any questions or comments for Peter at this point? I can see there are some comments in the chat box, Peter, so please do take a look there. But got any questions? John, you've got one, I can see.
Yeah, so that was horrifying, close to my worst fears.
I said that something was being done. What's being done is whitewash the bloody thing as fast as you can.
Yeah, damn close to nothing. So I've done genomics stuff in the plant science world, in which you don't have to worry about this kind of thing.
Yep.
What should be done? What should the correct policy response be to actually make it available, so that research can be done for very important, human, society-changing research around health, while also not being just completely ignorant of very important personally identifiable information?
Bring the portcullis down on the open access side right now. So do not close down Pride, do not close down Proteome Exchange, do not close down the other ones. They are very important data repositories. And there's a lot of animal data in there as well. We've got a lot of rat data. I say we, an organization I have worked with, for example, that doesn't need restricting. Rats can't make subject access requests. And if anybody's been watching the Ig Nobel Prizes, neither can cockroaches, if you've seen the ones about dead cockroaches being sufficiently magnetized to stick on fridges and use as fridge magnets. So keep the animal data public access. That's fine. Human access, shut down the public access right now, do a big push out to the researchers saying, hey folks, you are going to have to tighten up your data processing because this stuff is special category. If you cannot tighten up your data processing, you really should not be keeping this data. Step 2, work out who is downloading this data. There is nothing to stop it being communicated, but you need to have the appropriate legals in place. That's particularly entertaining when you've now got the UK about to piss all over its data protection stuff, Europe with very tight data protection with GDPR, and the US going, data protection, we've heard of it. And you've got the major research communities split basically between those three and Australia. There's a huge lab in Australia as well. So you're taking international, intercontinental data protection laws. Yes, for Rachel, there are very serious implications in terms of health insurance in the States. Step 3, and this is the horrible one, is academia is going to have to tighten up its data protection. I was the data architect on the University of Manchester's secure data processing, the system architect on the University of Manchester's secure data processing initiative after the first 2 both went tits up. They're looking at, hang on, 100 terabytes of data. Yeah. And you've gathered this under what rules? Oh, good clinical, ICH good clinical practice. Okay, and that means what? We've got to keep it for 20 years. Right. In its original form. Right, okay. What if it was only Research Council data? Only 10 years, that's okay. And you're trying to work out where you're going to store 100 terabytes of data and put a couple of 100 cores of processing. In one university's case, one of their data centers doesn't have and can't get ISO 27000 at all. Their other data center can, but God help you if you want 2-site replication, because this is data you have to keep for 20 years. I'm aware I've just overrun my slot, by the way, but Sam's just waved a hand at me. Fine. Is there a way for someone to find out if they've been compromised? No. However, most of these samples you will have given consent for at some point. So, for example, if you are in UK Biobank and you donated blood samples in that direction, you will have given consent. Some of these labs might have got some of your blood and run it through genomic or proteomic. Nora, I sort of half agree with your comment that these are very sensible points. They shouldn't hinder research, except that universities are horribly, stupendously strapped for cash right now. Fixing this at one university is a 7-figure job. Okay, so 1 to 10 million quid of effort to fix this per university. How many universities are there in the UK that are research active? 40, 50? So if this isn't a £100 million job for the UK university sector, I would be astonished. If it's not a £1 billion job worldwide, I would also be astonished. Fun, isn't it? 23andMe, yeah, that is also going to be so much fun. They are just relying on your consent for their data processing. And 23andMe and Ancestry.com in particular, there's been some real scare stories in terms of what people have found out, just in terms of what the genomic data brings. Now, of course, you've got this proteomic data, and the guys at Proteome Exchange were explicitly talking about backmapping that to genomic data, representing it as variant calls in the genomic form, and uploading it to the genomic databases. Okay, because you can. It's going to be fun.
Yeah, well, thank you so much, Peter, for that talk. I think it's been really, really interesting, really eye-opening, and a true horror story, I think. So thank you very much. Peter, if anyone wanted to get in touch with you, how might they contact you?
So I am Peter at the dry lab, is where you don't get your fingers wet with doing actual biology stuff. The wet lab is very much, in one lab's case, the blood comes in at one end in vials, under dry ice to keep it sufficiently cold and that kind of thing. You process it through, and the mass spec takes the result at the other end, for example. This is, as I say, is human samples. So actually, you've got to keep a log of everything you process. The lab that I've seen does that using Excel. So there's like tens of thousands of rows of data. And if somebody actually accidentally deleted 500 and resaved it, they'd be gone. Just forever.
What's the answer? Just to stop using Excel is the story.
Stop using Excel. I'm sorry, there just is no other option. Anytime you have more than one user of the data, Excel is the wrong answer.
Brilliant. Yeah, thank you so much, Peter. Perry says, yeah, going to use a notepad here. So, yeah, so just to finish up, I thought, well, I'll just finish that horror story. And so the anonymous horror story says, yep, so it was clearly something. Any guesses? We've got a few guesses there. It says, turns out that their coordinate reference system transformation wasn't working properly. So when opening Jupyter with the Anaconda prompt, the required package is misplaced. When opening it via Anaconda and Navigator, it worked no problem. And absolutely, some of you got it absolutely right. The shapes are Canada's Great Lakes. So yeah, give yourselves a little a round of applause for recognizing that. So and that I think draws us to a nice little close for this year's Data Horror Stories. And just to thank you all so much for joining us this evening. Thank you, speakers. Thanks to John and Joe from Data Manchester, and Rachel yourself for and speaking as well as co-hosting with me. And yeah, and a huge round of applause to all of our speakers tonight. And yeah, we hope to see you again. Maybe we'll see you next year for Data Horror Stories, and maybe even scarier. Who knows? We might do an in-person one next year, or maybe we'll keep it online. I don't know. So
I'll see what I can do if you want scarier.
I don't know about that. So yeah, brilliant. Thank you very much, everyone. We'll probably be online till about 8 o'clock if people just want to sort of hang out and have a little chat for 5 minutes. But also, if you want to go off and make your tea and so on, you're very, very welcome to. So thank you. We'll call it a close.